Mike Macdonald tore his ACL in his final season of high school football. It happened on the last play of a scrimmage leading up to what would have been his final varsity game. For a kid who was obsessed with football, so obsessed that he would watch NFL Network documentaries on the bus ride to school, it was heartbreaking. But in that moment, the 18-year-old never could have predicted where he'd be 2 decades later. One game away from the Lombardi Trophy. But all of this came extremely close to never happening, until one phone call changed everything. Mike's playing career was littered with injuries, and by most accounts, he hit his ceiling on the field in high school. Regardless of his health, college ball probably wasn't in the cards. They told me pretty early that I needed to stop playing football. I kind of knew it by myself too. After graduation, he went off to the University of Georgia. Not as a student athlete, but as a regular old student studying finance. Then, somewhere along the way, he got the itch again, the football itch. So he picked up the phone and dialed his high school head coach, Xavier Smith. As it turned out, Smith had just taken a head coaching job at Cedar Shoals in Athens, only a quick drive away from UGA. Mike had dabbled in coaching the JV team when he was still a player, especially after he'd gotten hurt. But it didn't become a serious consideration until he asked Smith about an entry-level coaching gig. Mike did not want to blow this opportunity. He showed up in a suit and tie for his interview. He looked at me like I was an idiot when I showed up, but I just felt like if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this the right way. There was no interview. The coach couldn't turn down a former player. So he found a job for Mike coaching the freshman team and helping out with the varsity squad on game nights. The quick drive made it easy for Mike to make it to every practice and every Friday night game in between his college classes. At the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know that I'm searching to be connecting with kids or connecting with players or really what coaching was about. I didn't really know how to work hard. My work ethic wasn't really good. And Coach Smith taught me that. How to cherish relationships and learn from people and put in an honest day's work. Mike worked 7 days a week, dissecting film and crafting game plans, and it all paid off. His freshman squad had 6 shutouts in 9 games. The varsity team finished as the second best defense in the state, giving up just 6 points per game. Mike won the Coach of the Year award in his first season, but a year later, he had a decision to make. He graduated from Georgia's business school with honors. He had a long, lucrative career ahead of him in the corporate world, if he wanted it. Mike sat down with his father and broke the news. Instead of pursuing the career path that he'd studied for, he wanted to be a football coach. His dad pushed back immediately. My background is business. I looked at the life of a coach versus the life of someone in corporate America. Coaching is a tough world. I encouraged him to go into business at that point. I really was not initially for it. Mike was an analytical guy. Numbers and probabilities were his thing. This decision was the polar opposite. He had no connections beyond the high school level. No accolades as a college player. He'd have to start at the very bottom and fight his way up every step of the ladder. What were the chances of turning this high school assistant coaching job into a sustainable career? I toiled over it for a little bit, but I ended up just being like, what are you doing? This is where your heart is at. If you're 40 years old and you don't give it a shot, you're not going to be able to live with yourself. So he threw himself into the fire. He stayed at Georgia to pursue his master's degree in sport management while working as a grad assistant for the Bulldogs. Landing a GA job is no small feat, especially for a guy with no college football experience. And especially at a big-time SEC program like Georgia. Mike pounded the pavement to get that job ever since he was an undergrad. He hung around the UGA football office as often as he could. I was a pain in the butt in their office. Basically just didn't take no for an answer for 2.5 years. He landed as a volunteer coach under defensive coordinator Todd Grantham. And he did it all, helping with recruiting visits, studying film, and anything else the full-time coaches asked him to do. You're so early in your career. You don't need much food. I didn't need much money. I was sleeping in the office the majority of the time. And you want to do a great job, and you want to make a name for yourself. Mike was determined to become the go-to guy for all things Georgia football. He ended up spending 3 seasons with the Bulldogs, moving up from volunteer coach to defensive quality control assistant. Coach Grantham had really high expectations and a really high standard about doing things, and I just happened to be the touch point on those tough conversations. We did a lot, and it was a blessing in disguise. My life sucked for 3 years, but I learned a ton of football. Toward the end of his time at Georgia, Mike was feeling burned out. All the long hours and late nights didn't feel like they were paying off. He had just gotten passed over for a coaching job under Grantham, who had went over to Louisville and hired his brother instead. On top of that, his GA status was set to expire. It was a new low point, and he started questioning whether the grind was worth it. Why not take a job that required less work for more money? So he did. After interviewing with KPMG, he got the offer and signed the contract. I was going to make $55,000 a year as a 27-year-old first year out of college. I thought that was like $1,000,000. I was juiced. It didn't feel right, but he couldn't see a clear path forward in coaching. All around him, he saw two different types of people. Head coaches and coordinators with lucrative contracts and a huge demand for their services. And guys like him who were grinding it out for tiny paychecks and the slight possible chance of a bigger role. Just as his doubts almost threw him off course, his phone rang. A year earlier, Mike had interviewed for a scouting internship with the Baltimore Ravens. But during the interview, he made the mistake of telling the scouting director that he really wanted to be a coach. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. But he had made an impression, and his name stayed on their list just in case a role opened up in the future. A year later, it did, and the timing couldn't have been better. This time, the Ravens were looking for a coaching intern, and they called Mike. When he answered the call, he heard the voice of special teams coordinator Jerry Rossberg. At that point in my life, it was just like a call from God. With two competing offers, it was an easy decision. Consulting jobs are a dime a dozen. This was the National Football League. So 2 weeks after signing the offer letter from KPMG, he told the recruiter thanks but no thanks, hopped in his car, and drove to Baltimore. It was a 1-year internship. He started at the ground level as the lowest guy on the totem pole, and he shared an office with 2 other coaching interns. I think they were trying to figure out what the role looked like over time, so we were just looking for stuff. We'd say, hey, what can we do? Let's take that off your hands. Let's take this off this guy's hands. His first day on the job, he spotted then GM Ozzie Newsome in the hallway. As he walked by, Newsome said, "Hey Mike." He was speechless. That set the tone for everything that came next. This was it, the opportunity of a lifetime. Just like at Georgia, he became a key point of contact at the office. And at the end of his internship, the Ravens hired Mike as a defensive assistant. After 2 seasons, John Harbaugh promoted him to defensive backs coach. Then, in 2018, he moved to linebackers coach, where he spent the next 3 seasons. In 2021, he went to work for John's brother, Jim Harbaugh, in Michigan as their defensive coordinator. And that's where he first had the thought that maybe, possibly, he wanted to be a head coach someday. A year later, he went back to the Ravens to lead their defense. At 34 years old, he was an NFL defensive coordinator. In 2023, his unit allowed the fewest points in the league. Then, on January 31st, 2024, he was named head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. At the time, he was the youngest head coach in the NFL. Think about that. The NFL has been called an old boys club for decades. It's notoriously difficult to break in unless you know someone or have the right last name. Even then, it's hard to stick around. Mike Macdonald didn't check any of those boxes. By most accounts, he breaks pretty much every rule of what an NFL head coach typically looks like. Never played past high school, no father or grandfather who coached. No legacy connections in college or the NFL. If he had listened to his college professors or even his own father and just followed the percentages and probabilities, he probably would have given up somewhere along the way. But he didn't. He stayed dedicated to his craft for a long period of time. He climbed every step the hard way, and look where he is now, leading his team to the Super Bowl in only his 2nd season as head coach. Just 2 years removed from being the youngest head coach ever hired in the league's storied history. The mindset that got him here can be traced all the way back to his senior quote in his high school yearbook. If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse.